Evening, and I'd like to welcome you folks to the August Morgan and Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. A few administrative notes tonight. We've got 3 agenda items that are new business tonight. 2 deal with an amendment change to the zoning ordinance, and another is a zoning ordinance request. Those that wish to talk as we go through our meeting, you'll be given the opportunity to approach our podium. We'd ask that you give us your name, your home address, and we'll be happy to entertain any comments for a change of a zoning situation, or if you're against it, we'll entertain that too. Another administrative remark I'd like to make is I'd like to give Claude Huffman some recognition. He had served faithfully on this commission for a number of years. We will miss his participation. I'd also like to recommend or welcome the senior planner now for Morgan, and Jesse James. We're pleased to have you with us. This is, I think, your first commission meeting to join us, so appreciate that.
Thank you.
And replacing Claude is a new commission member. We'd like to welcome Eric Engstrom, who is with us tonight. We appreciate you stepping forward to volunteer and joining our commission. Okay, kicking off, we'd like to start with the old business. Members of the commission, you've had an opportunity to review and examine the April 19th meeting minutes. Is there anyone that would like to suggest a change or deletion or making that, or at least stating that there's no changes? I'm going to move that the meeting minutes are approved. Our next item would be review of city council action that has taken place since our meeting, and I'm going to ask Philip from the city staff if you will address that.
The most recent item that we considered was an alternative design for the Bonnie Mist on North Green Street, and if you drive out now, you'll see that under construction. So it was approved by City Council and is being built as we speak.
I want to digress back to the meeting minutes of April. We did have a discussion about attendance for applicants. Has that moved forward at all? Not to put you on the spot, but.
It has not.
It has not. All right. I'd like to see if we could do something to incorporate that within reason. Okay. Our next item is appearances. Again, like I said, we have 3 items on our agenda for tonight that are new business. If there's another issue that is pressing some of you folks in our audience tonight and would like to address the commission, now is your opportunity to step forward and let us know what you're thinking or what planning considerations you'd like for us to address. All right, seeing that no one is moving forward to that, I'm going to now open our meeting to new business. Our first item tonight is a request for a rezoning change, and it's approximately 4 parcels that comprise collectively about a little over 2 acres. One tract is 0.95 acres, another is 0.33, another is 0.29 acres, and the final tract is 0.44 acre. These are located at 313 West Union Street, 101 Lyman Court, 103 Lyman Court, and 104 Lyman Court. And the request is a zoning change from conditional use to our new zoning classification, which is Medium Intensity District, MID. And this has been submitted by Mr. William F. Andrews. To start this off, I'd like to ask the city staff if they would go over their analysis and review of this request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. As the chairman stated, there are 4 properties that are included in this request, and you see those, they'll be on the screen in just a moment, Chad, and I can, those are what they, so there's Lyman Court, and you see in Union Street where it ties into Union Street. And so these properties, again, the 313 West Union Street is currently zoned, and I'll get to the zoning map, and let's zoom in on that. So the 313 West Union is currently zoned residential high conditional use. And that has, on top of that, an overlay of neighborhood conservation. And then the remaining parcels are zoned residential high conditional use. And again, the request would be on the first parcel, the request was simply to go from conditional use to MID. So on the first parcel, that neighborhood conservation would remain. Let's see. Okay, so that covers essentially the background as far as what everything is zoned. The property is also in the West Union Street Historic District. And so to give a little bit of a background, these properties were rezoned to from residential low to residential high conditional use, and that happened in May the 2nd, 2005. And a conditional use permit was issued for 14 dwelling units, which was comprised of 12 single-family detached units and 2 attached units. And I'll get to that in just a moment. Let's see if I can. I may not have put that in. Okay. You have that in your packet, members. And if you will look over that, and if you have any questions about that, let me know. But, the plans under the conditional use permit were never carried out. And so fairly recently, the owner, Mr. Andrews, had submitted a development plan that varied significantly from the plans approved. It still maintained the same density, essentially, but it had, the access was different on Lyman Court, and altogether the amendments had what we call, or what was called for in the zoning ordinance, or the ordinance that rezoned the property from residential low to the residential high CU, which is ordinance number 5-10Z. It stated that the plans could continue with minor changes. However, material changes would be required to come back before Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council for review. So then comes the adoption of the new zoning code, which is January 1st, 2015. And it states that properties with existing conditional use district zoning shall retain their existing zoning with all conditions as approved unless the property owner requests a map amendment to one of the zoning designations as set forth in this ordinance. So basically what that says is that development can be built as it's currently approved, but if it changes, if it has those material changes, then it has to be rezoned to a current zoning district, and that's where we are at present, is a request to rezone the properties to MID. So looking at we look at the zoning comparison. So a comparison, the conditional use district was a tool that was available in the previous ordinance, as you all are aware. And its intent was to allow zoning districts in certain locations that would, absent special conditions, be inappropriately zoned. So the conditional use district was attached to standing zoning designations and given conditions that a property could be developed, and that those conditions ensured that the intent of the zoning ordinance was realized. And the current zoning ordinance does not provide for a conditional use zoning. And we went away from that. The medium intensity district is intended for a variety of medium intensity to high density residential and low to medium intensity civic, institutional, office, service, and retail uses designed to keep the impact on adjacent residential areas at a minimum. And that language is straight out of our zoning code. The access is to the property. The property at 313, as you see on the map, can be accessed, 313 West Union can be accessed via West Union Street. The remainder of the properties must be accessed by Lyman Court. Lyman Court is West Union Street is a minor arterial, and let me get to that slide. So West Union Street is a minor arterial, and then Lyman Court is a 14-foot wide road used for residential access to the properties fronting on its borders. You can see here the average daily traffic count on West Union in that area is at 9,300 cars per day. So there is a water line, 6-inch cast iron pipe currently connects West Union Street toward West Concord Street, so water is available. Sewer, however, flows in two directions along Lyman Court, and one towards West Union Street and then another towards West Concord Street, leaving approximately a 150-foot gap between the two manholes. So in order to develop this property in any way, upgrades would, depending on the development, may be necessary, but I would say likely be necessary to serve certain portions of that property. So we also look again at the future land use. The future land use map in the 2030 Mission 2030 plan calls for the property to be low density, residential low density as the future land use, and the review of the attached future land use map, which is here, illustrates that all the surrounding properties are designated for residential low density. So for future rezoning, we recommend that consideration should fully take into consideration the analysis considered for future land use as part of the Mission 2030 plan, but also as recently in the recently adopted downtown master plan. And I'll get into that in just a moment. We do not feel like that the request is spot zoning because it is adjacent to Central Business District, so there is it's a tie into adjacent commercial and potential commercial uses. The primary impact to the surrounding land would be to increase the traffic, particularly for those residences located on or adjacent to Lyman Court. Other impacts are possible depending on the development for the proposed properties. The current zoning ordinance does place conditions on most uses adjacent to residential, and that, again, as I stated before, is to ensure compatibility, and in the case of the property, and this property with the neighborhood conservation overlay, it actually precludes several uses. Now, and I would like to go over that because I know that is a concern. So what I did is I took a clip of the permitted uses table in our zoning ordinance, and so if I may for just a moment, if you look at our, oops. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, so in my experience, a lot of folks have concerns about what retail uses are going to be located next to their properties, and so I just clipped the retail uses section. So if I take either, if I look at a restaurant or a retail use that has less than 3,000 square feet, if we go over to let's see, let me give. Oops. Sorry. Takes it away from me. So if I take this use, which let's say it's the restaurant with no drive-through, and then I follow that, then under MID, that is a permitted use. However, it is not a permitted use. It precludes that, so it's not a permitted use in the NCO, or Neighborhood Conservation Overlay. But let's say that it was allowed. Let's say that it's not a property that's in the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay. So then what it does is it says, okay, well, you've got to meet the conditions of section 3.4.5A. And those conditions are are illustrated here. And some of those are, if it's a use within the MID, then you have to have a minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet. It shall not be within a neighborhood conservation overlay, and then it states further that all structures within a neighborhood conservation overlay have to be 50 feet from that neighborhood conservation overlay. So it provides a setback from the neighborhood conservation overlay. And then it says that all those uses have to take their access directly from streets that meet the commercial street standards that are set forth in our engineering specifications. And then they also have to meet all of the performance standards in Article 4, which is just kind of a step up of what the requirements are. It talks about building requirements, facade treatments, and those types of things. So while this ordinance, if you recall from adopting this ordinance, while it allows a much wider array of permitted uses, it also puts conditions on those uses, again, to ensure compatibility with the neighboring properties. So that's a little bit about the zoning comparison and what the impact could be to surrounding properties. So in looking at all that, the staff recommendation, we said, okay, so the rezoning request, it is averse to the goals stated in the Mission 2030 plan, which again states that it should maintain a rural and suburban character. But to that end, it also suggests that densities are no greater than 2 dwelling units per acre. But as any planning document, as the nature of any planning document, that planning document was written in 2009, and we have had a more recently adopted downtown master plan. And that downtown master plan talks about the need for residential within a half a mile of the intersection of North Green and Union, and to which this is on the from that intersection, it's on that border. But it states that we have a deficiency of housing units in the downtown area of 1,029 units. So the rezoning request, while allowing limited commercial and other uses, would seem to aid in furthering the goal of more housing in close proximity, walking distance of downtown. Given the protections afforded by the zoning ordinance and provided that future development of the properties would be undertaken only in strict compliance with the current zoning ordinance, staff recommends approval of the request as submitted.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Is there any questions, comments from the members of the commission at this particular time?
And one more illustration, if I may. I forgot that I put this in here at the end. This is a map of the 313 West Union is encircled in a red hatched area, and that is a 50-foot buffer around that parcel. So that illustrates the setback that I mentioned earlier, that if it's a use within 50 feet or adjacent to a neighborhood conservation overlay, that creates for most of those commercial uses, it wouldn't provide a setback for a residential use, but for a commercial use, it would create a setback of 50 feet from that parcel.
Philip, my question is, do you have this where you can display this?
Don't believe that I do.
The point I'm going to point out to the commission members is this: the existing old plan still exists, and that was approved in May of 2005. The owner of the property today could still implement the plan that was approved in 2005. What is being presented today are basically, as Philip describes, changes or modifications, and that's what we, as the commission, have to address. You know, Judy, did you have a question?
I just want to clarify on the new submitted site plan and proposed site plan or concept plan that the dwelling units are accessing via either Union Street or West Concord Street, and those are the only two access points.
It would only be Union Street.
There would not be any other access points.
That's correct. That's correct.
That's correct.
Are there any other comments or questions from the commission?
One thing to your point, Chairman, I believe this property was basically vacated and cleared in around 2005, and we have our ordinance in 2009 at that point. And as I understand it, with the conditional uses now in place, that was accepted with Lyman Court as is. Am I correct in that?
Well, there was a complete plan submitted to city council. This was 2 May 2005. And basically, the dwelling units at that particular time basically remained the same. Traffic was, ingress egress was off of Lyman Court with, I think, one exception, with the 2 units that came off of West Union Street. We'll get into that, I think, when
I guess
we open discussion up.
my point is, as you said earlier, though, the conditions remain in place as active unless we do some modification or action.
Yep.
To that.
And to modify or to take
so my
action to
question,
do that
yeah.
requires a rezoning
Yeah.
change.
So my question of point is, Lyman Street is considered a substandard access to basically only a few properties back there. And one of the things that was approached at that time, as I remember, was the inability of access of city equipment, particularly fire protection, that sort of thing, which would be a concern unless that street was modified and brought up to standard. So I guess what I'm saying is, with the conditional uses still in place, under that scenario, that street would remain in substandard, but yet be buildable. Is that correct?
No, any development on that street would have to,
Would have to come up.
would have to come up to standard, yes. And also provide the fire apparatus turnaround.
Even though it's in conditional use?
The conditional use, if you look at the conditions, two of the conditions that were, one, that there was supposed to be a privacy fence installed along the property line between this property and it looks like Kenneth and Rhonda Bonfield. And then there was also a stipulation that it was going from a 15-foot 6-inch right-of-way, it looks like, or paving, to a 22-foot street. So that was part of what the original was, and so it would be required to be brought up to our standard.
I'm just stating the question for basically clarification.
Did I get your question answered? Any other comments, questions on the commission? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to open this up to the public, and what I would like to do is start off with folks that are here tonight that would like to address a proposed change to the conditional use zoning that is currently in place. And if you would like to make comment, then please step up to the podium, give us your name and where you live.
I'm Caroline Irvin. I live at 108 Terrace Place. I'm a retired real estate broker, real estate owner, and I've lived here all my life. In my estimation, the 2005 rezoning of this property is the worst I've ever seen in my life. West Union, to the left of this property, the back side of the lots on the left, is the Good Samaritan Clinic. At the time it was rezoned, the street was open to West Concord Street. It's now closed. I just rode down that. One car can go, you can't even 7 feet. I don't know how you're going to get it open to that. It's a perfectly wonderful place for 2 or 3 houses. Anything else is pretty ridiculous. Terrace Place is right across. If we went straight and didn't turn on West Union Street, we'd go right into Lyman Court. So it's right across there. We can hardly get out as it is. Number one, because the Botchelders have a fence that causes total blind on the left-hand side coming out of Terrace Place, if anybody would care to try that. The second thing is, I can't do anything about all this zoning, and I don't understand what, half of what you're talking about can be done here. I just know the road is horrible, the traffic's bad, and if you all remember, there are a few of you that were here then, when we had the leaky fire hydrant that leaked for 13 years on Terrace Place. It was reported, and every time it was reported, the city would put a black plastic bag over it and tie the bottom. And we got, finally, somebody got the news people on it, and they put it, it went on the Associated Press. It went across the United States about this leaky fire hydrant. Guess what was done about it? That is the fire hydrant for this property. It's across the street, directly across from Lyman Court. It's one of the major water fire hydrants. It was taken out. It's gone. Fire trucks can't get in there. I happen to be a victim of a huge fire. Fire trucks can't get in there. We can't get out on Terrace Place. You can't do anything with the other side of the property because it's Good Samaritan Clinic. The West Concord side, you can't, not only can you not open it up because it would affect this property pretty terribly because the crime rate back there is pretty bad and it's a whole different ballgame from the zoning on West Union Street. I can't, at the time it was rezoned, there was a letter from every single, as I know, except for Ken Bonfield, everybody else on the whole street had written a letter or contacted about not doing it. So please just take into consideration that it was bad zoning to start with. He's never done anything with it except advertise it at high prices that nobody's going to do anything. It'd make 2 nice duplexes back there possibly. The road, I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do about the fire code, but please take all of that into consideration. None of us want it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Dignan. I live at 317 West Union, and I would like to ask a question about plans for addressing the increased traffic that would occur if all these units get built back in that area.
What is your
There's-
specific
Well,
question?
there are already 9,300 cars per day that come down West Union. How many more do you estimate would be there?
Well, if you had, let's say, based on, I'm just going to look at the old development, that's 13 units. Residential units, I believe, are, so probably additional 78 trips per day.
Okay, so 78 trips a day. Let's take that at 7:30 in the morning. How would the traffic be managed there? Would you put a traffic light in?
If we made any changes, there would have to be a traffic impact analysis, and DOT would take a look at that. Since West Union is a DOT street, they would look at any proposed development that would be placed there. And they would say, okay, you have to, if it met certain thresholds, they'll say, okay, you have to do a traffic impact analysis.
So the
I
traffic
don't know.
impact analysis happens after the units are built or before?
It happens before.
Okay,
And I haven't talked to the DOT about that because while we have, while the previous request or the previous zoning contemplated residential units, and what triggered this was a development plan for residential units. In a rezoning code, our code or rezoning application, our code tells us that we cannot consider what the proposed use is in the rezoning, since any use in that permitted uses table could be put there. We're not supposed to consider a specific development proposal in a rezoning, but I can tell you that the widening of that road, or any development that would cause the widening of that road, would cause interaction with DOT, and then they would tell us whether or not it had to have a traffic impact analysis, which would tell us what measures would need to be taken, whether it's nothing at all, whether it's a turn lane, whether it's a stoplight, whatever the case may be.
so there's a lot of people that walk up and down West Union every day, and I think it is a potential safety hazard and it needs to be taken into consideration, so I hope you would think about that.
Before someone else comes to the podium, Bill, if you do have that up to where they can see that. Again, if you look up at your screen, what I'm trying to emphasize is that was the proposed conditional use plan that was approved by City Council in May of 2005. Whether we do anything tonight or not, that plan is still on the books, and that plan can still be implemented. What we are addressing tonight is subtle changes which we have yet to really, I think, hear clearly to where we can make a decision whether to approve the rezoning request or deny it. So with that in mind, again, I'm asking for those that are in favor of the change to the zoning, please step forward.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Ken Bonfield, and I live at 315 West Union Street. I share approximately a 450-foot border with the property at 313. I remember very well what the original proposal was. It was when the four houses were knocked down on my side of the property, on the right side of Lyman Court, there were 8 units proposed. On the left side, where the property goes way downhill to the Good Samaritan Clinic, there were 6 proposed. On West Union, there were 2 houses that were very attractive, very nice, brick, very colonial looking, semi-detached. And those 2 houses probably each had a 2-car garage, and they would be accessible from West Union Street. I remember this very well, because I was interested in this plan. I thought it was very attractive, and I remember these were selling for about $390,000 a pop, and I thought, hey, this is going to be great for West Union. This is wonderful, especially compared to what was there, which was a house that sold for about $250,000 to be knocked down. So now you're going to build 14 units, anywhere from $350,000 to $390,000. I thought this was going to be amazing. If I remember correctly, the street was going to be widened. There was going to be possibly cobblestone streets. There were going to be gas lamps. This was the proposal. The street was going to have to be widened. I don't remember there ever being any talk about connecting to Concord Street, because if you folks are familiar with the topography over there, Concord Street, where it ends, is probably 15 to 20 feet higher. I'm sorry, Lyman Court, where it ends, is 15 to 20 feet higher than Concord Street below. So how you would ever get something down there without ruining that other end of the neighborhood, it seems impossible. The entire street would have to go way downhill. And if you remember, there are still houses at the end that people live in. So you're never going to put a street at a 30-degree, 40-degree angle to get down to Concord Street, so that's never going to happen. I also remember that the street itself was not wide enough to be utilized by fire department and things like that. Furthermore, in order to access the 6 properties that were on the left, you were then going to have to make a 90-degree turn into a cul-de-sac on which there were 6 properties built there, on the left of Lyman Court. Okay, that was it. So that was my recollection of this. There were 8 on the right, 6 on the left. Furthermore, I had approved this plan because I wanted to see something positive and something attractive for the neighborhood that would have certainly increased the tax base for the city, but also would bring in good quality of people. These houses were for sale for upwards of $390,000, and they were very well appointed. They were 3-bedroom, 3.5 bath, 2-car garage, granite, stainless. Everything was nice. It was a beautiful plan. I remember seeing all of the floor plans. It was very, very nice. I had agreed to it because I have young children. I still have a young child, okay, who lives there. And one of my major stipulations was that since I didn't buy a house on a corner, I didn't want to be exposed to 78 cars going in and out directly next to my driveway. Directly next to my driveway. That if these houses were going to be accessed from West Union, I would accept that 1 or 2 houses could be accessed from West Union the way it was when I bought the house. Okay, this is a private house in a residential low neighborhood, the very reason I bought it, okay? So one of my stipulations that will always remain on this project is that there are not going to be 78 cars going in and out directly next to my driveway. That is completely unacceptable. If I wanted that, I would have bought a house on a corner, but I didn't. I didn't pay for a house on a corner for all the right reasons. I have young children. I still have young children. So it is very important to me that as this project moves forward, 2 things occur. Number 1, we continue to have the majority of the access to 14 or more, okay? It hasn't been specified at this meeting at all how medium intensity is going to change the number of units that are going to be presented, because we have no visual proposal of this. I have no schematic of what Mr. Andrews is talking about. And I like these kind of things. I want to see what he's talking about, okay? But one proposal is that 78 cars do not go in and out next to my driveway. And number two, if there's any garages whatsoever that are facing my property and there's going to be car activity directly next to my property, I need a protective fence there to be put up to safeguard my family, my children, from any activity that's going on over there. So the very last thing I want to say here is, please explain to us what this new designation is. It's called medium intensity, is that correct? Please explain to us what kind of things can be built in medium intensity. For example, in my brain, I'm thinking, is he planning something like King Street Court? King Street Court is a very nice development. You've got 15, 18 houses in there. They're brick. They're 2 and 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath. They're beautiful. They're well appointed. As you know, they've maintained their values. And rarely a unit comes for sale that doesn't sell within a week because of where they are and what they are, okay? So what are we talking about? What are we talking about? You know, for 10 minutes, I sat here and I listened to how this doesn't agree with the 2030 plan, and I saw pictures where everything is in yellow, because that's what the proposal is, and I went to that meeting at Comma and loved what I saw, okay? And then the last 30 seconds of it is, but we recommend that this be approved because we need over 1,000 new residential units within a half a mile of North Green and so-and-so, okay? And that is in agreement with that. Certainly, of course, there are other places this kind of thing can be built, but I'm not anti this project. I'm not anti this project at all, and that's what my friend Carolyn Irvin had mentioned, that everybody but me was against it, because I can tell you right now, there are 2 empty lots next to me with an enormous amount of vines and weeds growing on the fence that I have, okay? There are possum, there are skunk, okay? You have no tax base on this, and Lyman Court is about to die because there's nothing going on there. So I can't imagine that the long-term survival and best project for this property is to leave it the way it is, okay? Given the value of real estate in the West Union District, you know that, everybody knows, that the most important piece of this property is the piece that faces West Union Street, okay? But that's not the only piece that's available, okay? But everybody knows that's the most important piece, and if that piece was affordable and somebody would buy it, they would come and build one beautiful spec house on it, and it would sell for $600,000, $700,000, and everybody knows that, okay? But that's not what this market has become. This market has become 4 properties joined together in one piece, and now there's proposals to build something that I hope is of good integrity, good quality, that will sell, okay? What you folks might remember or might not remember is that a year or 2 after this proposal came on the table, the market fell out from under. And there was a big sign in front and beautiful Lelands planted, and this was what was going to be. And as you remember, not a single unit sold because the market collapsed. It was just bad timing. But as the market is turning around now, number one, please tell us what medium intensity will allow Mr. Andrews to put there. Show us a schematic of this, okay? And show me where it will meet my requirements, okay? Owning a house that has a tax value of over $600,000 on that street, to the point where it will meet my requirements that I don't have a highway next to my house with 78 cars going in and out, because that is unacceptable. I didn't buy a house in the middle of the street to have that. Lyman Court has access. You're going to widen it, it has even better access. You got 14 houses there, those people should be going in and out of the street that is already there. It doesn't make sense for those people to come on a driveway next to me. So I want to see what the plans are. I want to see if it's close to what the conditional use was, because I was able to approve that and I was able to accept that for what was coming. Please explain to us what medium intensity is, and please show us a schematic so we, as the population of this neighborhood, have a better idea of what you are talking about. I am clueless right now as to what's going to go there. Is it King Street Court? Is it something like that? Are they 2-story condos? Not going to be garden apartments because he wants to sell them. People don't buy garden apartments. People rent garden apartments. So what are we talking about? That is the information I need. Please explain to us what type of structures you're potentially setting us up to have there so that we can make better informed decisions. Thank you.
Is Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak in favor of this rezoning proposal? Would you like to step forward?
Well, as a developer, I was going to speak last, if there's anyone.
Well, I think it's important at this juncture
So I
that,
thought I'd listen to all those.
well, I think right now, we'd love to hear from you, sir.
For the record, I'm William Andrews. I'm the owner of the 4 parcels. My residence is 4721 Northwest 27th Avenue, Boca Raton, Florida. Surprisingly enough, the plans that I have submitted to the city address 99% of what is spoken about and concerned. Number one, none of the houses that are to be built, all of them access on Lyman Court. There's no other access to the homes. Number two, obviously, Lyman Court has to come up to city standards for that particular neck of the woods, and you wouldn't leave Lyman Court the way it is and try and sell new housing on it the way it's at. So that's going to be taken care of. Another thing is, yes, the front of West Union Street, the property on the west side, is, I have it designated as a single-family lot, about 140, 130 feet deep. Now, there's no design for that. I don't want to anticipate what somebody would want to build a single-family home. Somebody may want 3 bedrooms, somebody may want 5 bedrooms, 6 baths, who knows? But they would obviously probably have to come before you people to show elevations and what have you, to say, okay, this is the aesthetic that's on the street, therefore our single-family home would look at it. So I was planning to offer that particular depth as a individual purchase for someone that wants a single-family house. And I don't want to spend a lot of money guessing as to what that might be, and I don't want to build a spec home on that, because you never know what people actually want for their homes. The rest of the homes on the west side of the street would be coach homes, and all of the homes would be individual, and as opposed to townhomes. There are no townhomes, there are no apartment styles or anything like that. They're all single family. There's a turning lane for a fire truck. We put that in there, so that shouldn't be a problem at the end, and which would also probably function as a turning lane for the end of the street for people that wanted to turn around and not pull into somebody's driveway. The density is exactly the same. It's 14 units. And I've submitted renderings of the style of the units. And let's see here. There were some other questions about the the adjoining property to Mr. Bonfield's is only 378 feet. It's not 400 and whatever, but it's there. There would be, he already has a fence up there, but there would be landscape on that, but that is not the approach for cars. The cars all approach the houses from Lyman Court. So there's that. Before, in the existing plan that was approved, they would come on the back, on the west side of the property there, so that no longer exists. The problem that I ran into, obviously, thank God I didn't break ground, because I would have been caught in a pretty big mess due to the recession that was coming forward. So, and we couldn't find, when we got the bids in for the plans, we couldn't find a market for those particular homes because of price. It wasn't that a lot of people didn't like them. It was just that there was nobody offering to purchase any at those particular prices. So what I did was, about 9 months ago, I came up here and asked a lot of people in this community, whether they're realtors, they're home builders, they're people that just live in the immediate area and what have you, and I said, what is needed? And what can they afford, what can people afford to put a nice quality project on Lyman Court. And everybody kept coming up with the same answers. It was individual answers, which was that the square footage of the interior of the homes should be somewhere between 1,300 and 1,700 square feet. These are designed at 6 of them are designed at 1,700 square feet interiors, and the others are designed at 2,000 square feet. Let's see, what else was, the other thing was that the price point, everybody came up with the same number, $250,000. And I'm sitting there going like, I don't know how you do that. But we have figured out a way that we're only about 7% over that price on the west side units, on the east side units of Lyman Court. And we're at about 285 for the ones on the west side of Lyman Court. So that's the price point. And regarding price points and everything, I've had real estate signs, I've given opportunities to various local realtors throughout the years, since 2005, to sell the property and let somebody local give it a shot with a Class A development. And I've had a whopping total of 4 phone calls since 2005 for wanting to build on those sites. And I never got a contract for it, but there was just the first initial phone call to call and say, can we build a house there? 4 phone calls. And I think that's the best piece of property in the entire, vacant property in the entire city of Morganton. I was shocked that nobody, and even the builders, the local builders and everything, nobody wanted to come forward and even offer some sort of price on the property to buy it. So now I feel pretty comfortable that I've designed really nice units. 6 of the units have a design that you might call contemporary craftsman. There's a craftsman house. The Wakefields, I believe, own a craftsman house right at the corner of the entry of Lyman Court. And there's numerous craftsman homes throughout the city, so this has kind of a craftsman look to it. The others are homes that replicate the design of homes if you go to Savannah, Georgia, or you go to Charleston downtown, and you see individual homes there that are very narrow, but have a lot of square footage to them. That's the design on those particular units. So those are 1,700 square feet. In addition to that, there's a backyard open area of about 10,000 square feet where, assuming that some of these would be for families moving in, it makes a great play yard in the back to a community play yard. The entire area, all the homes would be covered under a homeowners association agreement. So crazy things can't happen unless all the people decide that, they want to change something. Then, of course, they probably have to come here anyway. But I'm a firm believer in HOAs to make sure that the quality of the houses stays up to par over the years. I don't know if there was any other questions that came up. I wrote down as many as I could think here that as far as the 78 trips that were mentioned, DOT has already, I called DOT. DOT just needs some striping for a turn lane, and they already said it's easy enough to do. I mean, they know the project. They were going to, when I submitted the first plan back in 2005, they were already looking at that and saying, okay, what are we going to tell this person they have to do? And the answer was for 14 units, we just need a striped turn lane coming out of the downtown. And that's all that's needed there. So other than that, I think I've answered all the questions.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody on the commission have questions, Mr. Andrews? Hold on. I do want to ask 2 questions. One,
Sure.
What is the significant difference of what you're proposing now than what was approved in 2005?
Well, in some places, they wouldn't say it was significant, but what we did was, on the east side of Lyman Court, there was a driveway that went downhill with a cul-de-sac at the end. And this is what really blew the project apart, was every home, as it steps down, there would have to be a berm wall built in, and it was very costly to align the homes to face north and south. In this instance, the front is facing Lyman Court. So they go just right like little soldiers up Lyman Court, facing east and west. The other side, the driveway that Dr. Bonfield was concerned about doesn't exist anymore because everybody accesses their garage. Their garage is directly off Lyman Court. And there's another thing that, I'm reading your codes and I'm trying to work with your planning director and associate and the city. I'd like these to not be 100% cookie cutter. For instance, garage doors. Garage doors can be very boring, very bland and everything like that. Every one of these garage doors is a Copley high-end decorative glass, what have you, front kind of thing. But I don't want them all to be cookie cutter. I'd like the residents, when they order the home, say, which one would you prefer, to give a little bit of difference with front doors to their homes. If somebody wants there's some front doors that the entryway, some of these entryways can cost $6,000 just for that, and they're gorgeous. But somebody may just want a typical white painted door, depending on that. But considering the fact that every home reflects what the next one's going to be like, I can assure you that as the designer of this project, it's going to be something that every neighbor is going to be happy with what's next to them.
All right, second question,
Oh, and I'm sorry, there's one more thing. These would be a 30-year vinyl siding as opposed to brick. The brick would bring those houses up another $20,000 and take it right out of the market. But there's detailing, there's on the face of the buildings that allow for them to be quite attractive. They have to be in that area. They can't be unattractive elements.
my second question was asking for clarity. If I understood you correctly, the frontage property along West Union Street,
Yes, sir.
you're entertaining that to be separated and sold off as a
Single-family lot, right.
residence?
Yeah, because I think that when you look at West Union Street, it's single-family homes. They have wonderful elevations and everything, and I think that would be something that somebody would be interested in, as opposed to just carrying the coach homes all the way down to the end of the street there. I don't think that would be an attractive solution right there.
So in effect, that reduces your density, what was originally
No.
planned in '05
No.
at 14?
No, it doesn't reduce the density. It just changes. That was at that time, there was how should I say this? There was a trend. And by the way, it started down in Charlotte where there were twins put together. And so that's what it was, a twin at that time. And what I did was I simply shortened that lot up and added a regular coach home to the back. And then, so this would be a single-family home. It wouldn't be a twin, because I think that's more appropriate for the market right now, number one. And number two is I think it would look better for the street.
Any further questions?
Just a couple things. You may or may not be prepared to answer specifically, but you mentioned earlier that each one of these units is now a separate home into itself. And
Which they were before, with the exception of the one on
Okay.
the two
On
on
the front.
Yeah.
Okay, from that standpoint. And you mentioned the thought that you have as far as some individualization of the units, some particular dressings of the front that might be different to an individual unit
Right.
as well. Is that something that comes about after general sale and construction, or are you basically at a point where you're saying, pre-sales and we'll build versus?
Correct.
That's
Right.
what you're considering is pre-sale and build?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Louis, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, members, may I address something as city attorney?
Please.
I think it's important. I didn't intend to speak, but I think we're in danger of going way off track here. The issue before you tonight is strictly a question of whether this property should be rezoned to MID. Mr. Andrews' plans are frankly irrelevant to that decision. His previous plans were extremely important because that's what the conditional use was granted for. It has been determined that his proposed new plan is a major or significant variation from those plans. Therefore, if he wants to do that, he's got to get it rezoned. However, we don't do conditional use zoning anymore. The property's either going to be rezoned or it's not. If it's not rezoned, he still has his conditional use previous plan, which he apparently no longer intends to carry out. I would note a couple of things. One is the reason that it's a major change, among other things, he no longer intends to build a residential structure on the lot facing West Union. He's changing from access off a side alley for some of the homes direct to direct access on Lyman Court. Those are significant changes. There are others that Philip can go over with you if you need. But I must remind you, the real key is, should the property be rezoned to MID, which is what's requested? You were asked earlier, and I'll be glad to address this, but perhaps Philip should, what MID involves, density, for instance, if it's residential. And I would reiterate also that Philip explained that the great significance of the fact that the front lot is a neighborhood conservation overlay. Nothing in the rezone would change that, of course. So do you want me to address that, or have Philip address that? I think it is important to remember what MID permits. And Philip has already addressed why even many of those things that are permitted in MID are not permitted in the neighborhood conservation, so it wouldn't matter that they're permitted in MID.
Yeah, I'm trying to achieve some delineation as to the differences of what we're gonna create by rezoning.
Right.
If I understand what was approved, we know what was approved in '05. Now we're venturing into new territory to a zoning change. and to
I
know
mean-
what impact that has. That's what we have to understand.
I can just say one thing that's very easy to say is a difference, and that the audience may appreciate, is that if use is to be residential, then MID, the base zoning residential density is 2 units per acre. The absolute maximum with every possible bonus point is 10 units per acre, which would work to about, I guess theoretically, 18 units, but that's not really relevant because of the neighborhood conservation taking up nearly half of this property. It's actually going to be far less than that. But that could be one difference. And then, of course, there's the fact that non-residential uses are permitted in MID, quite a number of them. But the nature of the property, the narrowness of Lyman Court, and the presence of the neighborhood conservation mean that the vast majority of those non-residential uses are either impossible or completely impractical on this property. So I would say that.
And that combined with the conditions that are placed on each of those potential uses as well.
Correct.
And, and if I could, I guess, further state, and like Louis was mentioning, is that in order to get the density, to obtain the density that would be necessary to replicate the development that was approved, there is that possibility. It starts you out with a base density of 2 units per acre. But it allows you to accumulate through various items, whether that be sidewalks, whether that be building standards, facade standards, whether it be residential yards, whatever the case may be, connectivity, to accumulate points and to accumulate up to a maximum of 10 units per acre. It also addresses in there, in the dimensional standards, lot widths. It's, you know, and if you get below a certain lot width, then you have to access from the rear. So there's any number of standards that are there to guide or direct or regulate, however you want to say it, residential development on those parcels. What I covered was use, because use is typically a concern, particularly when it's commercial, adjacent to residential. And those protections are in there. Those protections are in there because there was a departure from conditional use zoning. There was a departure from conventional zoning, which is only regulated by use. And so it was meant to provide or afford the protections that a conditional use zone would protect, while also allowing flexibility of design by the developer. So any development is going to be, under MID, is going to be governed by those standards. And what Mr. Andrews or any other developer of that property or any other property would choose to incorporate in their development, it's kind of up to them. The ordinance gives them a list of what is possible. So it could look a number of different ways. The reason that we didn't get into the analysis of the proposed development is, as Louis stated, and as I stated earlier, Section 2.2.8D of our ordinance says that you cannot consider that in the rezoning. So we didn't get into a real in-depth analysis of that. And again, restating the differences is the access from departure of access where it was originally 3 accesses on Lyman Court to now 13. And then also the I've lost what I was going to say, but the major portion was, or the major difference was the access. The 78 cars a day is well, I'd like to clarify that just a bit, but that is based on trip generation from DOT or AASHTO manuals, and basically what that is that is stated to be normal traffic. You know, if I'm a family of 4, I'm going to make an average of 6 to 9 trips a day. I'm going to come in and out. I'm going to go home. I'm going to leave in the morning. I'm going to go home at lunch. I'm going to leave at lunch, and I'm going to go home at night. My wife would do the same thing. So I'm up to 6, 8, 9 trips a day. That's the 78 cars. It's not that it's any influx of cars. It's the same as, it could be in 13 units, it could be 26 cars, but it's just the number of trips, and that's an average trip generation per day.
And while I'm standing here, I'll just go ahead and ask, do the board have any questions for me as lawyer?
Yes, please. If this gets rezoned at MID, and it's still in the neighborhood conservation unit, that doesn't, the property being MID doesn't void out the neighborhood conservation unit restrictions.
No, there are quite a few MID districts in the city that have a neighborhood conservation overlay in them, quite a few areas. They're mostly LID, but there are quite a few that are MID. The other thing to remember, and I think we've made this clear, but if you rezone to MID, the conditional use goes away. This property would have to comply with MID requirements now, and the part of it, and remember, it's only part of it, is in the neighborhood conservation, would have to comply with the special rules for that. And if you look in the table of permitted uses, you will notice there are many specified uses in MID that are absolutely not permitted in the neighborhood conservation. Now, they would be permitted in the back part of the property, of course, But remember, that's only accessible off Lyman Court, and that in itself is another restriction, because many uses require direct access to an arterial, like West Union.
Thank you.
Can I address some of those? I think they're very important. If I can address some of them.
Please.
As a former member of a planning and zoning board, I can appreciate your positions and city council and what have you. First of all, the MID, later on in this process, I was told that the frontage for each particular lot would have to be a minimum of 50 feet. That's not the case here. And it can't be. There is no way to get 14 units, and I'm not, under any circumstances, giving up the density of this property. So now I noticed that you have, there's a way for variances or what have you. But if you do the MID, what would happen is then you would have to create, for instance, you would have to go to townhomes. You couldn't go to individual homes because you wouldn't get 14 units out of it that way. I have to get some of my investment out of this property. And 4 units isn't going to do it, and 6 units isn't going to do it, and what have you. Okay? What I didn't want to do is I didn't want to go to townhomes. I didn't want to go to twins. I can do twins. And so then you pick up distances that allow you to do, let's say, 50 feet or something like that. But then you have what I would call a lower step down on the type of homes. I think individual homes are what should be done there. And the problem is that if you go to some of the requirements that you've got there, and there's no, like I said, you don't have conditional use anymore. But the point is, it would guarantee that I would have to take a back approach off of Lyman Court. This is on the west side, and take a alleyway along Mr. Bonfield's property to get into the garages in the back there. And there would have to be clusters of 4 to 6 to 8 townhouse units on those properties in order to make your existing mandates of dimensions work. Now, if that's what you want, then, if you make an MID, I'm going to go for 20 units. Because the market is going to demand certain things for me to sell these units. And you can't get 14 residential units on that property with some of the restrictions you've got in there. And so I think that, I don't know what, you're a recommending body. I don't know what the council would do about it. But the point is, any number of people would say they want, and I believe that they should be single-family units. And the term on the west side of the property is coach homes. The idea that they're turning off of Lyman Court into parking spaces and then the garages, that your town is full of that sort of, that's a standard thing. I live in a community with 375 homes in a very nice community. There hasn't been one accident since I've lived there in 12 years, and we all back out into a public street. So there's some of the things here that I think when you look at this, until you have somebody come up and say, here's what we think would be great, but then you come up with some items. And by the way, I submitted in my application decorative street lighting, 1 point. Tree-lined streets, 1 point. Sidewalks on both sides, 2 points. In my mind, what I've submitted gets you up to 11 points, which gets you to, I don't know, what would 11 points plus what I've got there? I don't know what the number would be, but it would be more units than what I'm proposing as single family. I'm not asking for more density. That's usually the issue. But in this case, you want to make all sorts of other things issues, which with your properties in the downtown or in the entire area of Morganton, I think you're going to, at some point in time, it may not be with me, because if I have to sit on that property the way it is, then I'll sit on it. But I think that you need housing, and I think that I've asked around to the various people in the community, and I think what I've come up with is a beautiful, and it's too bad you don't have the renderings that I brought that you could show on the screen here of the housing that I put up. So I don't know where we go from here.
Thank you, sir.
And maybe this goes back to Mr. Vinay. As I understand what Mr. Vinay said, is we are not voting tonight on a proposal or a lot plan. We are simply voting that this gets rezoned MDI. And we don't have any control over what goes once it goes MDI. It's simply MDI, and then it goes back to the zoning and regulation we passed a couple of years ago.
That's correct. Okay. Anyone else that would like to speak in favor of this rezoning request? Okay, now I'll turn to the opposite. Anyone that would wish to address the rezoning and is not in favor of it?
That was a hard question. I'm Janelle Wakefield, 311 West Union Street, and we live directly across from Mr. Andrews' property. The only thing we're concerned with the MID zoning is the front lot. I really, for the integrity of West Union Street and the investments that people have made, feel like the front lot, if Mr. Andrews plans to leave it vacant and build a single-family home there, if that lot could be low density. I know perhaps he may have to survey it. Would that make, but that's up to him and up to the zoning board. It just makes better sense to me when you have the density that we're looking at. We'll have it across the street from us and behind us, but his property surrounds ours. And Lyman Court, of course, the traffic is a concern. We have thought about it within my husband and I, and thought maybe a speed bump or something, because people tend to want to be in a hurry to get home. But that's the only concern that we really have with it, is the front lot, because it's not going to be developed immediately. And should it ever change hands, that the integrity of the neighborhood be protected for the front lot.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else?
Good evening, I'm Dr. Matt Robinson. I live at 101 Terrace Place. I have some questions. One, obviously, it's been addressed that there would have to be a DOT regarding West Union. I live on Terrace Place, which is immediately adjacent to West Union and Mr. Anderson's property. I already have an extremely high number of vehicles looking to bypass red lights, traveling down Terrace Place at high rates of speed, where there are at least 5 children under the age of 8 that live. This is of concern to me. I already have drunks and drug addicts passing out and sleeping in our yards up and down West Union and on Terrace Place. They're already camping out in our adjacent properties and in our yards for the night, for the week, for the hour. I have homeless people traveling up my driveway all the way up into my backyard looking for money and food and work. And I want to know if any of these concerns have been addressed. It's already a problem. What's going to happen when you put 18 units that are $250,000 each into any given facility or area. My home itself is a $500,000 home. All of my immediate neighbors are physicians, and they all have homes that are actually more expensive than mine. The Collettes live next to me, and they have a $1.2 million home, sir. And you're telling me the best we can do is 18 units at $205,000 or $250,000? Why can't we put in 5 homes at $500,000 and call it good? I mean, what is most important to me is my family's safety and well-being. And I'm a citizen of this community, and I pay taxes. And so my expectation of you as elected officials is that you will take into consideration the safety of my family. And if my family continues to be unsafe and becomes less safe than they already are, I will simply move. I will sell my home, and your tax base will go away. So with that in mind, I appreciate your time and ask you to do whatever is right for our community, keeping in mind the people that live here and are part of this community and are already paying taxes. Thank you.
One point of clarity, we are an appointed body. We volunteer our time and efforts to evaluate these issues. So we
I appreciate that. I
your
didn't know
comments.
that. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'm really nervous to talk in front of you all, but
Don't be nervous. Give us your name and your address, please.
I'm Leanne Britton and have recently moved to 103 Terrace Place. My concern with this is not the residential properties that he's talking about putting there now, but if this plan does not come together as he's indicated and as he had planned in 2005, and with the types of properties that he's talking about putting there, I don't see how he's going to be able to build that for $250,000 to $285,000. And I think that Mr. Lingerfeld could probably help you all with those numbers a little bit. If that doesn't happen, and this is MID, then those back properties, if something were to happen over at BUCM at some point, and that property could be sold, then it's my understanding that a restaurant or all sorts of things could go in that then could be accessed from West Union through that BUCM property. And that's my concern, is that that NCO would go away on those back properties. Can you speak to that?
You want, the NCO, as we understand it, really covers the first or front property that is along West Union Street. Everything that's behind that down Lyman Court does not fall under that neighborhood conservation overlay.
So if in the future, and, you know, the last people that lived at 103 Terrace Place were there for 44 years. That's my plan, is to be there for the next 44 years. We can't say what's going to happen 10 years from now, 20 years from now, but if something were to happen and BUCM were to go away, that would be, you know, a really important investment property for somebody to purchase. I could easily see a restaurant going there. Who knows what might go there. It would be a great location for a lot of different things, and would then provide access to those back properties on Lyman Court. And that's my concern, putting that in the MID district, MID zoning. There would not be those conditions on those back lots that he currently has. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Anyone else like to address the commission? All right, seeing that, I'm going to close the open public hearing and bring it back to the commission for comment, discussion, or a motion.
Can we have the definition again of the neighborhood conservation unit? The restrictions on that?
Neighborhood conservation?
Yes.
Well, I don't have the definition of neighborhood conservation. However, if you look, you have the ordinance with you?
Yeah, I do. I thought that might come up. If you give me just a second, I'll turn to it exactly, but the neighborhood conservation overlay is, thank you, I think Jesse actually has it. The intent by ordinance of the neighborhood conservation overlay is, quote, to protect and conserve established neighborhoods within the LID and MID districts from more intense or incompatible uses. Uses in the neighborhood conservation overlay are primarily single-family residential. I think neighborhood conservation doesn't even allow duplexes, for instance. It's basically, for all practical purposes, it's single-family residential. Again, the point, though, that Hank made, it's only the front lot of this property that is neighborhood conservation.
And if you'll remember, Mr. Andrews is entertaining the idea to sell that front lot
Right.
to as a single-family lot to a potential buyer.
A portion of that front lot.
Yeah.
As it currently stands, the front lot is, Chad, if you'll put that in the presentation. Yeah, it's a,
Now, Louis, another technical question is, can that lot be isolated out of this zoning request? It
I'm
be
sorry.
Isolated, platted
Oh.
out of the zoning request?
That would be up to the applicant. He's asked to rezone all of his property, right? I'm pretty sure. I mean, if he wants to withdraw part of it, they are separate parcels. They're separate tax parcels. So if he wants to withdraw one of them from his rezoning request, I guess he could do that. Although, remember, if he did that, then that parcel would remain under the conditional use permit. You know, now you've raised a really difficult problem, because the whole conditional use permit was based on the whole property having a specific plan. And if you remove two-thirds
Okay,
of it
Chad.
from that, then that's nonsensical. The plan wouldn't,
I think you'd have to
that would make no sense.
I understand.
I mean, I don't know how else to express it.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Discussion, Eric?
Yeah, if I might, just real briefly, though, one thing, I guess theoretically, you could rezone it to MID, and then once it was rezoned to MID, he could apply to withdraw part of it from MID and rezone it LID, but I don't know why you would do that.
I think he could simultaneously make that request he could make the request to rezone that portion to LID and the remaining portions to MID. if he
Yeah, he could do that,
wished to do
certainly. Yeah. You can, I don't think anybody's ever done it, but I guess you also could ask to remove a property from the neighborhood conservation overlay. That has not been done either
You
here.
could make that request, yes.
Rick? Thoughts? I'm going to make a comment based on what Mr. Benaya talked about. And our job here is to address land use. The conditional use zoning that's been in place since 2005, we already know what the densities are based under that plan. What's being proposed now, basically, in my opinion, doesn't change that density whatsoever. And it is residential in the old plan, it's residential in the new plan. So I'd like you to keep that in mind as we move forward, that we basically haven't changed significant anything other than the zoning classification,
You can't say that.
all right?
Specifically, we are voting simply to rezone it as MID, MDI, whatever, I'm dyslexic. But that's all we're voting on. We are not voting on the plan.
I understand.
This is irrelevant. For all practical purposes, we have not seen this tonight. And nobody can be held to that. The vote is simply, do we rezone this entire piece of property from the LID to the MID? That's the vote, period. And then anything that's allowed in the regulation that we worked on so long is valid.
And then we have to turn to Mr. Phillip and say, what can be done there?
Yeah, but I wish the conditional use was available to us, you know, but we don't have that option.
Well, in all fairness to the homeowner, I mean, the landowner, this MID is the closest thing to the conditional use that the property is owned at this present point.
That's right.
I mean, we can't cut his throat by rezoning it something else. I mean, is my feeling.
Okay. Eric, you got some thoughts?
Just soaking it in, just thinking right now. I do see two different things. I see, what is it, Miss Britton's point and possibly seeing being rezoned MID, something else going back there, as long as there's a home up front to kind of go along with West Union. But going with the downtown plan, having residential closer to downtown is a plus as well. So I'm seeing it in two different ways. So I'm kind of on the fence.
Judy?
I understand the neighbors' concerns about the uncertainty of a new zoning district. Quite frankly, the lack of due diligence in approving the original conditional use permit, with the developer coming in at this point and saying that the topography on the site is what's hampering his development, using the original conditional use permit. Sorry about that. There was plenty of time. I know. I lived here then. That was a long, drawn-out process. I don't understand why at this point in time, all of a sudden, all that is no longer valid. I'm not inclined to approve a change at this point because the neighbors have been dragged through this long enough already, and there is certainty in an approved plan. Unless I hear something that I haven't heard already, I'm not feeling very comfortable with the change.
Pete?
On the neighborhood conservation overlay, do we have a depth, according to this map that I see, I'm just extrapolating, that looks like the conservation overlay goes back further than 300 feet. Do we have any?
It goes back the depth of that particular parcel in that area. If you look at the map, what you see are the four parcels, and if you look at the blue hatched area, that encompasses that entire zoning parcel, which is the 313 West Union, PIN number 270, 315, 6576. So it's
Yeah,
that
but
entire
we're
parcel.
talking about chopping that in half, though. That
It-
parcel would be chopped in half or in some portion, to make the single-family home, but it would not do the whole thing. So then, for the back part of that, let's say we sell off the front, Standard sells off the first 300 feet, then the rest is still in the neighborhood conservation, technically. So then, the restrictions of that is, it's simply limited to single-family residents.
Single-family detached, yes.
You could very well have less density with MID is what you're alluding to. It is all neighborhood conservation in the front. You're left with a certain amount of acreage in the back. You could potentially have less density with your end product. So that's something to keep in mind. You're going from an approved CU plan to an MID that has a base district of 2 dwelling units per acre with a performance density of 10 dwelling units per acre. So that's very important to keep in mind when you're making your approval or denial here, is you're going from an approved amount of density to something that still has to go through development review, which doesn't mean anything's granted or given.
Well, I mean, have you test drove that to find out? I mean, the developer's pretty committed to at least his current density. It's hard to imagine that he would be coming in for the zoning change if he's going to get less density.
I believe that's something that's been discussed with.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed it, but again, it's not something that we've.
I realize that we
Or
can't
for
use that
right.
to calibrate our decision tonight, but it is what it is. Is he going to have the same density or no, at least?
You can't ask that question.
Then this isn't ripe for a decision.
If I may, I think that's a fair question. Because if you zone it to MID, it has a certain density.
That's right.
And remember that the base density is only 2 units an acre, which would literally only allow 3 units on this property. We all know he can do better than a base density. But Mr. Andrews, I believe, estimated he would get 11, at least 11 performance points. How many would that allow him, Jesse? That can be determined. I mean, I know that's not a fixed figure, and that may not. But I know that won't allow anywhere near the density that he's
11
seeking.
performance points would get you 2 additional.
It's only 4 an acre.
And this plan is roughly 7 units an acre. The current approved plan is 7 units an acre.
So he'd
You
have to find
2 acres.
He'd have to find a way to increase his number of bonus points, which he may be able to do. Because again,
It really depends on a development plan.
it would depend on his development plan.
Did that answer your question, Pete? Nope.
Yes.
Bill, you got questions or comments?
I just think there's some consideration. I'm very much interested in preservation of the neighborhood overlay, and that's positive from that standpoint, and certainly there are requirements there that have to be kept and maintained. The remainder of the property, I'm concerned, one of the things is that we're looking at a situation now which may be short-term compared to the long-term impact of this area. And there are a number of other things that are possible out of this. Number one, while this is not determined as yet, there are considerations of completely having to rework, to a degree anyway, the current split as a result of one-way streets up a little farther into that. We're talking about possibilities of restoring two-way traffic on each of those streets. That doesn't necessarily maybe change count of traffic, but it does pretend to some different travel methodologies and maybe concerns as to the individual cars coming down that area. And then the back properties, as they also adjoin to a different type of business, under the MID, there's a lot of different options beside residential. And those could be small offices, and they could be professionalized. I don't know how bad that would be, but it certainly would be more probably traffic than we're anticipating with strictly residential units throughout the course of the day. So those are some things I think that concern. I haven't heard a particular clarification for sure what happens with the back of the property. There was concern about a drop-off there of 15, 20 feet, and I'm not contesting that. I think I remember that distinctly as to whether or not we're just terminating that Lyman Court pretty much as it is, or whether that is going away in the plan. So I'd like to just be sure of that.
I think the end of Lyman Court would be beyond the scope of the project, so whatever is required, whether for a fire apparatus turnaround, would have to be accommodated within the scope of the project.
Right. And I think we're saying that regardless of the situation, sewer, road width, that kind of thing has to come up to standard either way.
Yes.
Okay.
Gentlemen, can I just ask one question, just for clarification?
Yeah.
Ken Bonfield, 315 West Union. In the event that MID does not pass, does residential high conditional use still exist for him to build the very project that he originally intended, as long as all of the original stipulations that were originally agreed to are met, such as the widening of Lyman Court, the modernization of Lyman Court, the ability to get fire trucks in. So again,
The original
because,
permit.
so it still exists. So residential high conditional use still exists because, again, there are changes in the plan that again, personally I see as positive, such as all of the units on the east side of Lyman Court would now be facing forward as opposed to dealing with making a 90-degree turn in there. To me, that's a positive. That would still give him 6 on that side. If he were to eliminate the 2 in the front, that gets him down to 12. But he still has that lot in the front to do something. Interestingly, if residential high conditional use still exists, he could still build that double unit, that twin unit, which was, I assure you, the nicest 2 of the entire development in the first place, okay? And people would be very happy to live in those. They were beautiful, absolutely. So in the event that MDI does not pass, Mr. Andrews still has the ability to build the 14 units, but again, it sounds like there'd probably have to be some type of modification to change the plan on the east side of, even though the density is the same, the east side development as it stood would have to change in order to accommodate his new plan, even though the density isn't changing.
Correct.
Understood. So again, if MDI doesn't pass, he still has residential high conditional use, and it's really his decision to decide what to do with that front piece still, because he passed residential high conditional use in 2005.
Correct.
Got it.
It's still very important to realize if the MID does not pass, what he has that he can do is what was approved under the conditional use permit. Any amendments to that have to be minor in nature. They can't be.
Understood and agreed.
Okay.
Understood and agreed.
And again, to follow that up, what is being proposed as far as amending that plan is of significance that dictates the requirement.
And I agree with
zoning
that,
request.
because the historic conservational overlay only protects what's on West Union Street.
Correct.
Right, and so even if Mr. Andrews was not the one who eventually developed this plan, if this thing is zoned MDI and he sells this property to somebody else, again, we would all be at the disposal of that person who said, no, I can do anything I want on that back piece. You know, there's no guarantee that if he says he's going to build 14, he's going to build 14. Okay, I own property at 400 Union Square, where there was an entire city block that was originally planned, and the guy went bankrupt before he finished it. And therein lies a huge piece of property next to Jerry's neighborhood store that never developed. Correct. So there is no guarantee, even if he starts, that he's going to finish. Okay. Again, it's a beautiful project in the event that it does finish. Okay. But again, there's no guarantee. And then MDI would not protect us in keeping it residential, as opposed to residential high conditional use, which guarantees that it's all residential because that's what was approved.
The front portion in MID with the neighborhood conservation overlay would still only allow for residential use. It would just be the properties in the back. So yes,
Correct.
if he pulled out,
Right.
he could, someone could develop the back against what he is doing. It's just the front, the only use that is allowed within neighborhood conservation overlay, as
Would
I
be
believe, is
residential.
single-family
Right,
residential.
but again, I share Mrs. Britton's concerns about that.
Yes.
Because I'm not just concerned about what goes on West Union Street, I'm concerned about what goes on in the entire neighborhood. And I don't live on Lyman
But
Court.
keep in mind also that if those back 2 parcels were to develop in the way that was suggested, i.e. pulling access off of Burke United Christian Ministries property, that street would have to be developed to a commercial street standard before any of those uses could occur.
Understood.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's some fairly strict conditions on there.
Right.
And again, they're to ensure neighborhood compatibility.
Thank you. All right, thank you, folks.
One technical question again. I'm not sure I have this straight in my head. The current neighborhood conservation overlay, like I said, goes back pretty far. If that lot is split, so the front part is going to be this residential lot to be sold off, which is a great idea, and that gets shortened some, does the remaining portion of that stay in the overlay, or does that overlay
The
change?
overlay would stay the same.
The request was only to go from conditional use to MID.
So you would have the .95 up front, they would still remain in neighborhood conservation overlay. You'd have the .29, .44, and .33. They would also be MID, but they would not have the conservation overlay.
Or the back part would lose a conservation overlay?
It doesn't have it currently. The only one that does is the .95 up front.
Yeah, okay, this diagram didn't show that way. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone on the commission that would entertain a motion? Hearing none, I will make the motion that we approve the rezoning to MID. Now, do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Any further discussion? I will call for a vote. All in favor, raise your right hand. All that are not in favor, raise your right hand. All right, so it looks like the motion fails and the request is denied. The other options that the applicant does have, you have the option to appeal our decision and carry that forward to city council at their next meeting on 10 September.
And I believe that the deadline for that appeal is 10 days from today.
Thank you, folks, for your participation. We have two additional items on our agenda tonight. I would like to entertain that we address one of those and table the other one till September, if we could do that. Unless the staff.
I mean, I think I think we're okay to move forward on those, but what you would do is when you bring that up and talk about it, you would just motion to defer.
Okay. Well, the first one, let me look at our agenda. We'll go back to that.
I can assure you those two items won't take as long as the first one.
I'm going to take item 3 as our first, because I think that's going to be a quick, and that's consideration of a text amendment to the zoning ordinance, section 4.1, to allow for increased density in the central business district for the implementation of the city's long-range land development plan. Philip?
I'm going to pass those actually off. Chad, if you could switch over the presentation, Jesse's going to make the presentation on those two.
Oops, the next one.
Yeah, it's whatever's live on my screen currently. We were gonna do food truck first. I think that's why this one is up. But Chad, I don't have the, I can't program it from my computer.
It won't allow you to advance. It won't allow you to advance.
Well, I've got, on my screen, I've got the CBD up, so I'm not sure.
Maybe close one of the,
Getting hungry.
Close. Okay. I've got it up on my screen. Do I need to take the PowerPoint slide off?
yes, do that.
Now the only thing is the CBD density page. Well, in lieu of that on the screen, we all do have the handout. We all do have the handout in front of us. So the reason that this density section came about is my short time here with the city of Morganton. Had several developers that have come to us and wanted to accomplish what our downtown, thanks Chad, what our downtown master plan that was adopted, the 2007 master plan, has in it, which is to create more density in the CBD. And actually, the plan and the consultants came up with 1,029 units that we should accomplish downtown in order to get the density we would need to have a more vitalized central business district. What you see in the handout is what is currently in our zoning ordinance, which is a CBD of a 4 dwelling unit per acre maximum dwelling units that you could build upon. What we are proposing in order to accomplish the downtown development plan is to let the maximum height, which would be for a residential building, 35 feet, to let that dictate the density and take the restriction of dwelling units per acre out of the code. What that would do, it would allow either a small lot to have 35 feet regulate the density, or vice versa, a larger lot would have higher density. One item that we proposed was any dwelling unit over 4 dwelling units per acre that's currently in there, the developer would have to install 1 parking space per unit, or the equivalent amount of green space that would encompass that area. During my research, what I did was I just found a vacant lot in Morganton, which is at the corner of Bichelle and East Meeting Street. Is currently 0.56 acres, which in a downtown is a fairly large size lot. What I found out from doing the math from our current ordinance is that for that entire lot, you could only get 2 dwelling units. So as we all know from a modernized zoning plan, you want more than that in your downtown in order to create that density. So by taking out that requirement of dwelling units per acre, what you have is if you have a mixed-use building in our current zone, you can build up to 65 feet. That would be a commercial unit at the lower level with however many floors of residential you could have above that, or commercial mixed in. The picture you see is a rendering of a 5-story building that would be around 65 feet in height. And from the lot that we saw above, I did a little math, and this is rough math, but roughly that lot size is 23,500 square feet with a parking requirement of 12,000 square feet when you have 36 units. And taking away egress, hallways, utilities, other design elements, you would look to have 1 commercial floor with 4 residential floors that would get you 36 units on a lot of that size, which would allow for more commercial on the bottom, and then the city could utilize the few amount of vacant spots to bring in that density of residential that we need, the 1,029 units we need. If you look at the vacant lots and the urban infill lots, I don't see a way to get 1,029 units unless we relax that 4 dwelling units or 2 dwelling units per acre. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Can you maybe give us your thoughts about any concerns that you might have about how, if we approve this policy or something like it, about maybe an overconversion of land going from commercial uses to residential uses and ultimately having the CBD turning into more of a residential district versus a business district?
Yeah, I thought about that, and in order to utilize a maximum, the maximum output on a piece of, on a small parcel, you'd want to go with the 65 feet. The 65 feet would require commercial on the ground level, because you would not be able, the max height you can get on a residential lot in our current, this would be not changing anything in the current ordinance, which I like the current ordinance on the heights. If you just build a residential building, you're only getting 35 feet, which is about 3 floors with fairly small ceilings. Most likely, you're going to get townhomes with the 35, with just keeping it residential. However, if you move to adding more commercial space on the bottom, you would have the 65 feet, in which you would be able to maximize the units for a developer.
You'd pick up, if you think the average first floor, commercial floor is 15 feet. So if you do the math, then you're going to end up with an additional 10 feet, so another floor over this. You'd have 4 floors instead of 3.
Yeah, and it's
Pick up the additional unit.
It's shown on the screen. I mean, roughly what you're looking at on a 65-foot building is 15-foot commercial floor, give or take some feet, however the developer wants to design it, and then 10-foot floors from 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So that's roughly what you would have as a residential or a mixed-use building similar to this one. Again, and you would let the market dictate the amount that comes in and goes out, but you'd have that protection to have at least some balance out of commercial when they maximize square footage. There's also room for amendments in the future to have certain elements of downtown stay commercial on certain levels, bottom floors.
And the other controlling factor that we put into the code was again, the requirement to either put a parking space or an equal amount of green space, so 190 square feet. You know, once you get over that certain threshold, then you still got to start adding parking. So what that would do is keep someone from building the entire block, and it provides some of that. You know, if you go to any urban place, whether it's Charleston or Asheville or wherever, you're going to see these plazas, or you're going to see these green spaces that kind of are recessed in. So you're going to have that requirement in scale with whatever development that you would propose.
Other comments or questions? I do want to ask about underground parking, how that would affect what we're proposing.
Well, you'd be able to maximize the units you would get if you did underground parking, because with that same lot size, you wouldn't have to allocate the roughly 12,000 square foot, which I got that from what we have in our code, which is 60-foot parking areas when you have 9-foot stall depths, 24-foot exiting and entering the stalls, and so you'd have 60 feet, which on this 0.56 acre lot, if you put the required parking beneath, then you would then be able to get more units on that lot.
Understand that, and the having a brain meltdown here, but going back to your front setbacks, it indicates here, I just want to raise the question, 0 minimum, which is right at the curb, but we put a maximum of only 5 feet, and maybe Sharon would comment about this, whether or not we want to be a little more flexible to allow for what you mentioned, plazas and other green space within that development.
Well, if you decided to not go with the parking, then you would then create a plaza in itself, and that would be the allocated parking that you would put towards like a green plaza. But I see your concern in being able to allow green space in the front of a building or behind, but that doesn't really go with more or less downtown plans. You kind of want to bring your buildings forward and have that green space on the side or in the rear.
Well, I'm thinking about, say, a street level restaurant that wants to do street side
Patios.
patios and seating. And if you minimize that setback at 5 feet, it's gonna be kind of tough, I think, to create an inviting space.
I believe a standard sidewalk, actually, it's nice to have Michael Burley here, but I believe a standard sidewalk is 6 feet, and a handicap access throughway would be 3 feet. So if you have 5 feet in the front and an additional 3 feet of an encroachment permit into the right-of-way, it would still allow for an 8 foot in depth front patio, which would, well, I'd agree, it makes a more active street front.
Okay.
And we have a current, there is a standard, if you recall back with the hotel development, there is a current standard that says you can only, that there should be built to the street, and then you can have a certain percentage of the depth of the building that would be allowed to be set back from the street.
And keep in mind, if it was an empty lot that did not have a sidewalk, part of our ordinance requires connectivity and sidewalks. So they would therefore get that extra amount with the right-of-way with an encroachment permit if they decided to do outdoor patios.
Okay, good deal. Is there any other questions or comments for Jesse? Everyone understand what the requested change is? I have someone who would like to make a motion for table 4.2 to be modified as proposed by the staff.
So moved.
I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
And a second. Any discussion? Questions? Hearing none, all in favor, aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, that is approved. You want to suggest a, what did you call it? Food truck order. Go through that. Next item of business on our agenda tonight, and hopefully we can go through this fairly quick, is consideration for amendment to the zoning ordinance to include mobile food vendors into section 3.4.8 under other uses. Philip, do you want to address that?
Again, that one's going to Jesse.
Okay, Jesse. We throw you under the bus.
Yes, and
For the food truck.
and this is fun stuff, so this will be actually fun to talk about. However, I'm gonna need Chad's help again, because I have no idea where
Where it disappeared?
that file went, because I had to, well, I don't see the common drive anymore. Oh. This is my first planning board meeting. I would like to,
You're doing great.
Hang in there.
I've got the planning down, it's just the technical computer issues. And you'd think the youngest person up here would know how to work them.
What a meeting.
I know how to work my own computer, just not someone else's.
My goodness.
So it should be the,
Do we have any food trucks in Morgan?
That sounds so good.
Stand by.
They're all over the place in Asheville, but I've never seen one in Morgan.
Because we don't have.
no, it should just be
I
a
mean,
shared.
there have been
order that we
food
had
trucks
before.
at
I don't know
different
how it-
events,
Is it computer?
but not in the fashion that we're talking about, allowing them here.
That's my point.
I'm sorry, I screwed up the order.
We used to work out of town.
Would it maybe be under the PowerPoint? Sometimes they say,
The guys was
sometimes they
busy
save
there,
those. Yeah, here
just
we go.
scrounging for them.
All right, I figured it out myself.
See,
All
Okay,
right.
Jesse?
Okay, so, what I'm going to present now and we have our downtown association department here with us, so I'm sure they would like to comment too. But kind of to start, the reason this came about was we've had a lot of, there's been a lot of excitement about food trucks, mobile food trucks, and we don't allow those currently in downtown unless it's a sponsored city event. So I've gotten a lot of calls lately about potential food trucks coming to downtown, so it brought up the idea of possibly allowing them again, or allowing them downtown. Currently, in the current ordinance, we have a section that addresses temporary retail sales, which is anything from produce stands, Christmas trees, and it includes food vendors. What we'd like to do is separate this ordinance out and have a food truck ordinance that would protect commercial, residential sites and allow standards to not make them a burden for the city. Currently, they're allowed in MID, HID, and SID, and not in neighborhood conservation overlay, but as I alluded to before, they're not allowed in the CBD. You're only one temporary vendor may be located on any lot of any record. This is all in the current ordinance. Temporary vendors shall renew zoning permit every 180 days. Does not include flea markets or yard sales. And trucks, trailers, and flatbeds shall not be parked on site as part of temporary use except for short-term delivery services. So keep in mind, this is our current ordinance, so it doesn't really address standards for food trucks. Our proposed standards for the new ordinance, the first section would be location. We've proposed that mobile food vendors may conduct sales while parked on public street when the city council has approved a temporary street closing for a city-sponsored or civic event, such as a street festival or fair. That doesn't change. That still happens today with our downtown festivals. We would bring that forward. Mobile food vendors must park at least 15 feet from any fire hydrant, 5 feet away from driveways, sidewalk, utility box or vault, handicap ramp, building entrance or exit, or emergency call box. This kind of addresses some safety issues that might come about with these mobile food vendors. These minimum distance requirements are all measured in straight line from the closest point of the proposed vendor location to the closest point from the buffer point, or in the case of a restaurant, measured from the closest point of the restaurant entrance. So locations continued must be located in a zoning district which allows for restaurants as permitted uses, which CBD does, obviously. Public CBD mobile food vendor locations volume and hours would be set by the City of Morganton Main Street Department, which we have here with us today. A mobile food vendor is permitted to vend at more than a single site, but each location must be approved by individual permit. And then kind of something we added in there to protect your brick and mortar restaurants. Mobile food vendors must be positioned at least 100 feet from the primary customer entrance of an existing restaurant during its hours of operation when permitted on a private lot, not for our public designated spots that would go to the Main Street Department, unless the vendor can provide written consent from the restaurant owner for a closer proximity. Kind of an example of where mobile food trucks could possibly go is where we currently have our tailgate market on Wednesday. A lot like that would be perfect. But again, that would be dictated by the downtown department. They kind of have the wherewithal of what's going on downtown and what's you know, what's appropriate for what time and what locations would do well. These food trucks would require a permit. It would require a zoning permit from the Development Design Services Office. And from there, they would go and get allowance from the downtown department if it's a public spot. If it's a private spot, say Catawba Brewing Company, they wanted to have a food truck on a Friday or Saturday night, we would allow it with the standards that we will present. You have to have proof of permit by a county health department with the state of North Carolina. It must be provided with the application. The applicant shall provide proof that contact has been established with Burt County Health Department. It goes along with more safety provisions. And an official from said department has cleared the applicant for operating a mobile food truck cart stand within Burt County. A copy of the zoning permit shall be kept with the vendor at all times, and these permits must be renewed annually on July 1st. That gives us the ability to track the food trucks. Some standards that you would have in place for the food trucks. A lot of them are with sound. Mobile food truck vendors may not use audio amplification. We don't want a bunch of loudspeakers out in the public square. All equipment associated with these vendors must be located within 3 feet of the mobile unit. That way things aren't sprawled out all over the place around the site. The vendor operator is responsible for disposing of all trash recycling associated with the use. They can't utilize city trash receptacles. Our Public Works Department already has their hands full of trash. They don't need more added trash with food trucks. Grease and liquid waste may not be disposed in tree pits, storm drains, sanitary sewer systems, public streets. Mobile food vendors are subject to citywide noise ordinance. One thing to bring up while I read these standards is I sent an email to all the planners in the state of North Carolina, and we've gotten a little wiggle room with not allowing these to let other municipalities kind of figure out what works and doesn't. So I figured I've got all these standards from a list of about 15 different municipalities that I picked different standards from, and I compiled them to make them fit with Morganton. I felt like these were all appropriate for Morganton. There's some signage standards, in addition to signage displayed directly on the vehicle and unit, one sign attached to the ground or menu board sign, which shall not exceed 4 feet in height or 8 square feet in surface area. Such sign shall be placed within 10 feet of the mobile unit or vehicle and must be removed outside hours of operation. Sale of alcoholic beverages shall not be permitted by any mobile food vendor absent the issuance of the requisite special event permit. Temporary outdoor seating for mobile food vendors may be utilized provided there is a minimum of 5 foot of clearance of any public sidewalks, and the seating may not be located in a public street unless part of the approved street closure. Mobile food vendors and associated outdoor seating shall be removed from all permitted locations during impermissible hours of operation, shall not be stored, parked, or left overnight on any public street or sidewalk. Some more safety provisions, a fire extinguisher with an up-to-date certification, Class 2A. So, and these items would be checked during the permitting time period, and they would be, we would go and frequently look at the sites to make sure they're up to code. A copy of vehicle or trailer registration, location of approved grease disposal facility must be maintained on the truck as well. Shall provide appropriate lighting, manner acceptable to city and minimizes negative impacts to adjacent properties or traffic. This is a big one for the downtown department. No direct wiring to electric outlets without public-private ownership, permission, and permits. That can cause a problem when you've got food trucks just plugging into random outlets on the square. Cannot use private dumpsters without permission of the owner of the lot. on private lots. I know that was a lot, but are there any questions, comments, concerns? Want me to go back to a certain section?
Anybody in the commission have a question? Comment? I know it's getting into the,
Just very quickly, Jesse, you may have mentioned, and I missed it, but in some of these designated areas through that, did you specify the number of trucks that could be at any one site? Was
That would be for a private lot, it would be one truck unless you have a bigger site. That is actually on the handout you have. Now, when you're utilizing the downtown public spaces and CBD, then that would be dictated by the downtown department, yeah.
Permit.
Otherwise, you would come to us and we would permit for the site and the standards and the specific items that you would be selling on the food truck and the safety precautions. If you have a large enough site, say, Rural King, then you may have more than one food truck permitted.
Different trucks have different things that they sell there.
Right.
so.
Yeah, you wouldn't just want a hot dog stand on the square every day.
anybody else? I got 2 points. One is under the very top of the second page, under proof of permit. What about the health and the Burke County Health Department? They do conduct food inspections and display of that inspection results, like you do in restaurants. Would these no mobile facilities be required to have that displayed also?
Yes, on the second page there, proof of permit by county health department with the state of North Carolina must be provided with the application. The applicant shall provide proof that contact has been made with Burke County Health Department as well. So anything that would apply to a restaurant would apply to these food trucks. And if a Burke County Health Department employee came out and saw that those weren't displayed, they would get their permit revoked, and I wouldn't give them a permit to begin with, because those are some of the standards that you would look at.
But you wouldn't want to input inclusive language that says that the results of the inspection will be prominently displayed. Just a suggestion. The other one is under fire extinguishers. Some people try to get by with the kind that you can, the smallest one they can get by with because of cost. My other thought would be the language to put or include approved size.
Yeah, we have a fire extinguisher of minimum class 2A, 10B, and C grade will be kept on the truck. So if you're using deep frying equipment, a class K fire extinguisher must also be kept on the truck or trailer. So that would be part of, if you don't have that stuff with you at the time of permit, then you would not be granted a permit to.
Well, the point being, if those fire extinguishers of the appropriate size to handle what this mobile food service is actually, if they're out there with a 4 or 5 watt burner that they can roll out, do you have adequate size to handle a significant fire? That's, I'm sorry, we don't have Claude here to answer that for us, but
Yeah.
just a point. Okay. I'll open it up to the public. Does anyone in the public like to address this issue? All right, coming back to the commission for further comment or discussion. If not, is there someone who would like to entertain a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Okay, I have a motion. I need a second.
Second.
I have a second from Pete over here. Any further discussion, comment, question? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, aye? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
I believe that brings us to the end of our meeting. If there are any other items to be discussed or addressed, hearing none, I'll move that our meeting is adjourned.
Fabulous.
All right.
Our next